Talk Live. We are very, very excited for our panel today. You can see we have a full panel today, and today we're going to be talking about clinical practice to MSL. Just some tips and pearls, or maybe clinical pearls, but for MSL life. And so, Tom, did you want to say a couple words?
Yeah, I'm super excited. I think this is an awesome topic. I get people requests all the time to cover this, whether it's on the podcast or whether it's on this platform. For all of our clinician friends out there, here you have it. I hope this is going to be great for you. We have an awesome panel. And why don't we get to some introductions? Kirsten, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So my name is Kirsten Gertowski. By training, I am a physician assistant. I've been a PA now for about 10 years or so. Spent most of my career in an internal medicine space and went back a few years before the pandemic for my doctorate. Worked as a PA through most of the pandemic, and I've always wanted to become an MSL. So that was the time where I decided to work to move into the field. So after about a year and a half, became a cardiac device MSL for a very small device company. And now I work as an MSL for a very large pharmaceutical company.
Awesome. Josh, we'll have you go next.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Josh James. I'm a cardiovascular medical science liaison at Novo Nordisk. I previously worked at AstraZeneca for a couple of years supporting SGLT2 inhibitors there. I am a cardiology nurse practitioner by training. I have a doctorate in nursing practice. I've been a cardiology NP for going on 16 years now, and really happy to have made the transition and be here today to talk to you guys. Yeah.
And last but not least, Nabhan.
Hi, so my name is Nabhan Islam. I'm a physician by training. My background is in microbiology and immunology, and I'm based here in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. I got my start in industry back in 2019 in respiratory medicine. It was a one-year contract covering British Columbia. And I've recently just finished a 2-year stint in vaccines and infectious diseases, again, covering Western Canada and the territories. Right now, I'm currently looking for my next opportunity, hopefully in medical strategy or field medical excellence. Thanks.
And hi, everyone. I'm Julie Chen, for those of you who know me or maybe don't know me as well. And I am a pharmacist by training. And so I'll be jumping in this discussion a little bit more, since we were trying to grab as many different type of healthcare professionals as we could for this discussion. And so I worked as an inpatient pharmacist for a couple of years, then was a heart failure pharmacist specialist in clinic for 5 more years, then went back to the inpatient side as a supervisor for 4 more years. After that, I transitioned into my MSL role and was primarily in the cardiology space, diabetes and nephrology a little bit as well. But currently I work as an early portfolio MSL in the cardiology pipeline. So thank you, everyone. We're really excited. We wanted to try to grab as many different healthcare professionals, because even though we're all clinicians by training, everyone's background is a little bit different. So I'd love to hear maybe just a little bit more, like, what maybe is different about your background training? What experiences do you think are maybe more unique to your healthcare professional role from, the different people on the panel? And so we'll start with you again, Kirsten.
Yeah, sure. So, what's I think unique about my background. So as a PA, I trained and went to school in downtown Detroit, Michigan. And so that area could be very tricky, very low health literacy. Mm-hmm. But then when I came out as a PA, I was practicing in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is one of the most educated cities in the country. So very unique perspectives, very different patient populations. What's interesting is I spent most of my career in internal medicine, so I'm not sure that I would have my current MSL job if I had just gone from clinical practice into this role, because I wasn't really specialized in anything. It wasn't like I worked as a cardiology PA for 10 years. So what was kind of unique about my story is that in internal medicine, I did inpatient and outpatient. When I was inpatient, I rounded in the congestive heart failure floors, preoperative, short stay, ICU floors. So for my first device MSL role, all of that just kind of worked out together because they were looking for a clinician that had pre-op experience, ICU experience, and cardiology experience. So like I said, I wasn't really an expert within any specific area, but that unique background helped me to get my first role.
That's amazing. Yeah, and sometimes it's funny the way it ends up that way. You do these different things in your career, and then years later, like, oh, this is all useful. It all came into play.
Exactly.
Josh, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about this.
Yeah, no. So I think, 90% of what we do as MSLs is sort of able to engage with people and talk to them and just sort of read a room and learn what the needs are of the clinic or the office or the person themselves. And I think specifically for me, I kind of started from, the bottom up. I, had a, double major in biology and chemistry. I went back and got my bachelor's in nursing. I started as I was a research scientist. I was a tech in the ER. I was a medic on EMS. I volunteered for years. I was a nurse in the MICU and the ER. I became an NP, and I got my doctorate. So I think what helps me along the way is that I really understand the importance of everyone who's in the room and trying to find, having a stake, who is in the room, who can help in the patient's journey and help with their sort of education and understanding. And I think that kind of stair-stepping that I did helps me to sort of notice everyone that's in the room when I'm talking to someone and engaging with, different KOLs or providers.
And giving you a really good perspective and understanding of like the healthcare system and everyone's role in clinic. I mean, I think that's really valuable. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, Naphan, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and your experiences.
Yeah, so after med school, I was actually working as a medical instructor. So I was basically teaching like first aid and defibrillation and that sort of thing for a whole bunch of like government and corporate clients. And I thought it was going to be just like a part-time job. It was just something I was doing while I was kind of applying for residency, and it turned into like a full-time job for like 10 years. So the thing is, like, basically, with the company, it's a lot like a corporation, like a pharmaceutical company. We had a PowerPoint presentation, and it was your job as the instructor to make it relevant for the audience. So I remember like some of our clients, they actually were illiterate because it was like a Catholic run daycare, and a lot of them had run away as teenagers and hadn't finished school, and a lot of them were illiterate. And then you had I had to go to hospitals, and I would be speaking to doctors and nurses and things like that. So it was the same PowerPoint, it was the same book, and it was me as the instructor. So I got a really good feel for basically making material relevant for the audience. So like you have to kind of like use the right terminology. You have to pause, and take breaks and check in with people, and all of those good communication skills. When I went into industry, it's kind of the same thing, right? Sometimes you have non-medical stakeholders who are educated but necessarily don't have a scientific background, and then you obviously have your doctors and your specialists. So I became really good at just being able to just adapt the material and make everything relevant for the audience. I also got really good with just using the whiteboard just to explain simple topics. And I joke a lot, like sometimes it's just like explaining things to like toddlers, right? Like it's not a question of intelligence, it's just like a question of like terminology and connecting the dots for people and just kind of illustrating points. So that was super helpful when I got into industry, and still really helpful to me today.
Thanks. And for me, just to share a little bit as well, I think I primarily focused in cardiology. It was my passion and sort of my strength, and so that's what I was attracted to when I transitioned to industry. But interestingly, as an inpatient pharmacist, you see a little bit of everything. As an inpatient supervisor, I was in charge of various departments. So I was in charge of infectious disease. I had to start and lead an antimicrobial stewardship program, which is so funny because I didn't have ID training, and so you like get launched into very quickly. And then I oversaw certain different areas like pediatric and ED was part of the stroke program at our facilities. So all these different backgrounds and different departments I was a part of has come into different plays during my MSL career. It's given me a lot of strength in understanding how the healthcare system works from a clinic side as well as a hospital side, as well as like quality metrics, because I was a supervisor. So I have this I feel now this very unique perspective that I'm able to bring. And I'm able to catch on very quickly on like how hospital systems are ran or how sites are ran. And so that's given me an advantage, I think, into trying to understand what people's care abouts are, what their importance is when you're talking to them. So I'd love to hear a little bit, and we started touching this a little bit, but why do you why did you guys start to consider going to MSL as a career? What made it a good fit? And why do you think it's a good transition for obviously like a lot of healthcare providers? Whoever wants to start.
I mean, I can start. So I think for me, I mean, my perspective is just I think clinicians just make such great MSLs because they're in these providers' shoes. I know most of my KOLs are healthcare providers. So you've been in their shoes, you know the struggles they go through, but not only that, you understand what patients are going through and what the patient needs are. So I think that's huge. I also think that you understand because you've been in those shoes how to provide value to a KOL. Like I know if I'm going into a busy internal medicine or cardiology office and it's outpatient, that they have rooms full of patients, labs to review, calls to make, portal messages to return. So I can put myself in their place and say, okay, if I was this provider, how would I, what would I want to know? Like what would be valuable to me if I have a quick 5-10 minutes only?
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I completely agree. I think being able to build that sort of trust aspect with the clinician, that's sort of different sometimes from maybe say the commercial side, which we're all valuable in what we do. But I think, as Kirsten said, getting it, like we've been there, we get it, our time, it sometimes there isn't a time, but really kind of coming in there and they kind of can immediately know that you're a clinician as well. You understand it. You're trying to bring value in, dive a little deeper. But I, as well as you, I've done meetings at 6 a.m., understanding that people, I always say like, look, I'm a clinician too. If you'd rather meet at 6:30 before your shift starts, that's totally cool. Or I get it, you're probably exhausted at the end of the day, but let me know sort of where I can meet you. And I think just understanding those little things are really important sometimes and sort of help to build a rapport and establish a trust earlier on in a relationship with the provider.
Yeah, that's all great points. I'll just tack on. I think for clinicians who are looking to make the jump, right? Speaking from the standpoint of a doctor, you've gone through undergrad, it's like 3 or 4 years. You've gone through med school, it's 4 years. You've gone through, residency, subspecialization, a fellowship. So when it's all said and done, you put in like 10 to 15 years of your life into your education. And I think there's like a deep-seated fear that you don't want all of that to go to waste. So, the great thing about industry is that like that clinical experience, that education is still being put to very good use. And, I think a lot of us also got into medicine just because, we want to help people, we want to make the world a better place, we want to alleviate pain and suffering, and we still get to do that, albeit indirectly. When we're working in medical affairs, so I think that is just immensely very gratifying to people who get into medicine.
And just to tag on really quickly, I think from an advanced practice provider standpoint, if you're good at what you do, it's very easy to hit a ceiling to where you feel like you can't go. I mean, I know I did, and it's when as a nurse practitioner or a PA, sometimes it's not as easy to cast a net as it would be if you were a physician, say, or think about a second gig. So that's sort of where I was. I was kind of felt like I was, at the top of my game in my MP career, and I got my doctorate, but I wanted to use it in the best way possible. And so, roles like this are really perfect because you can marry both your clinical expertise with your doctoral training. So yeah, that's where I was.
Do you guys, and I completely agree with you, because I think for a lot of us advanced practice providers, it's true. You kind of say, okay, well, I've done this, I'm running a clinic, I'm running a floor, I really specialize in this area, or you're like, I feel like I've learned a lot in this area. What can I do next, right? A lot of us are I think those of us who are curious and life learners are drawn to the role because you get to continue learning, right? So you're like, in your career, what can I do next? You're trying to get to the next step, and you're trying to figure out what else there is. And it's interesting because healthcare in the hospital, clinic, private practice setting doesn't have a lot of roles and paths aside from being a supervisor or a director of a hospital. And those become a lot more administrative. And you start to move away from clinical practice. And so there's always that thought of like, what can I do more? How can I continue like learning and growing? So it's funny because I think we apply that and it becomes the MSL role. Like we want to keep learning. We want to keep helping. How can I marry those two? But I'd be curious to just hear, do you guys think there's been a recent surge of interest in the last few years from healthcare providers? Yeah, because I kind of feel like there has been more interest. I'm part of that wave, as you know, as much as anyone else, but I think there's been more of an interest. I'd like to kind of hear what maybe like some of your theories and thoughts on like why that is.
I mean, I think burnout is real, unfortunately. And again, we've all worked really hard to get where we are, and you want to sort of continue being successful in your career, but you know, it's hard to work at the bedside for a really long time. I mean, I did critical care my whole career, and you get to this point where you're doing family meetings every day and you're seeing people die all the time, and it's just the amount of work that needs to be done. I love talking to people and I love talking to clinicians and patients. And I feel that I get a lot of that back in this kind of role, sort of like what Naham was saying, where it's you do get to spend that time and add value and kind of continue what you've been doing, you know, in the hospital, but in a different kind of way. And I think that's really special.
Any other thoughts on this?
Speaking, it's funny. Like the MSL Society, they do a survey every year about salary primarily, but they also like look at the percentage of MSLs that are by doctors. So I remember I looked up the data from 2013, and at the time they reported like 14% of MSLs were doctors, by training, and then in the 2022 survey it was actually 7%. So the those are relative percentages. Like in absolute terms, I don't know if there are actually more or less doctors in the system. But I think, to kind of add on to what Josh said, like the pandemic really may have been kind of like the final push that people needed to consider an alternative career, because now I think people are realizing like salary isn't the end all be all. People are thinking about their mental health. People are thinking about work-life balance. And industry offers so many of those advantages, right? So I think, it's definitely becoming more and more appealing. I think more people are looking into it, and it's kind of like Fight Club. Basically, like as more and more people get into industry, more and more people talk about it, more and more people find out about it, and then more people show up to Fight Club. So.
Well, Tom started the Fight Club then, apparently.
Yeah.
Well,
I was also going to ask Kirsten, because I know, especially in my curriculum as an NP, in my master's program, and in my doctoral program, learning about MSL is not something that's in our curriculum. And I know a lot of times as PharmD, you might be doing things early on in your PharmD training, understanding about MSL roles or things like this is what PharmD friends have told me. So you guys, it's a little bit more on the radar than it is for us, because it's always sort of goes back to, you must stay in the hospital, you must stay in academia when you do these things, but there's other ways. So I'm trying to spread awareness, as well as an MSL, going back to schools of nursing and things like that, because I do like to give back and make people aware that there's other things that you can do, than being at the bedside for your entire career. I think it's important to be there for a while, but know that there's other things out there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I just had this conversation about same thing with PAs, that we don't learn anything outside of clinical practice in school. And so I get asked all the time to go into, pharmacy programs and speak to students about the MSL career. So I've been really trying to advocate for PAs, and I'm actually going to be speaking at the Michigan Academy of Physician Assistants fall conference about the MSL career to many PAs. So I think that's a good opportunity. But in terms of what you're saying about more and more people wanting to get into industry, I completely agree with what's been said. I think the pandemic was a big part of it. But even before that, the landscape of medicine just changed so much in my career. I mean, my appointment slots for patients kept getting shorter and shorter. My hours kept getting longer. But one thing, I will say, just as a side note, unrelated, for clinicians moving into the career, if you're ever interviewing or asked why you want to be an MSL, just make sure you don't say that in an interview. Like, hey, I'm just really burned out, don't like my job. I get a lot of people that say that. And I think you do have to remember, make sure you show you're passionate about the career. You don't want to go into an interview and just say, I'm just really burned out.
Right. I agree with that. And I don't mean to be negative when I say this. For those who are just burnt out looking for alternative options, there are different options. And maybe being an MSL is not for you, because you do really have to hustle when you become an MSL. And you're learning a whole new career and a whole new industry. And there's a very steep learning curve. So I've had some people say, like, I did not realize how much work it was the first year. And I was like, yes, welcome to being an MSL. But you have to love that part of it. Otherwise, it's not going to carry you through, right? And you're going to come in and feel like you're doggy paddling forever. So my theory, if I may, is that it's like a combination of things. Like COVID, I think, caused a little bit of burnout, right? I think there's like, Kristen said, there's all these signs already that there's shorter time slots for patients. They're trying to squeeze more in. Everyone's plate became platters, right? So we're all doing more already for patient care. And then I think at the same time, industry in itself start to realize the benefit of having a strong medical affairs, trying to get a seat at the table, having strong MSL teams made a huge impact because we can really talk about the science. And talking about the science, being level, fair and balanced, giving that perspective allows clinicians to have the full spectrum and being able to really understand what you're offering them. So I think being able to speak on their level has been really beneficial. And now different companies are seeing that. So I think the pandemic highlighted that because during the pandemic, we're shut down. And so some of our colleagues, let's say in commercial, didn't have access to providers, but providers were still willing to see MSLs. And we saw that very clearly. So then the value for MSLs came up even higher. Like, okay, if something happens, they have only one time slot that's going to the MSL now. So I think that also brought in our value even higher. So then there seems to be this boom, right, of like interest, more opportunities. And then at the same time, I think we're just innovating, right? There's so much technology, there's so much research being done. We're able to now look at different types of diagnosis in healthcare. And now there's more TAs becoming more and more specialized. So now they need more people to talk about it because everything's becoming more specialized, right? So we're finding all different types of cancers. We're finding all different types of cardiac disease. So things that we never looked at 5-10 years ago. But that's sort of my thought on it. So
well, there's another piece of it too, though.
Yeah.
On the industry side, it's timing. 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, it wasn't as widely accepted. The job requirements were PharmD, MD, PhD. You check that box, and that's how you got a job. It wasn't NP, DNP, PA. It wasn't as widely accepted, and it wasn't something that was as considered as it is now. There's been a paradigm shift over the course of the last 5 years. For a number of reasons. I think the more people that broke into industry from clinical practice created more, these people become leaders, and then the leaders want people like them. But there's also been more, it's a supply and demand thing. There's been an evolution to the MSL role. It's not just that there are MSL jobs available. There's clinical nurse educator positions available. Right. There's clinical trial liaison positions available. There's diagnostic MSL positions available. So when you look at the landscape on the industry side, things have changed pretty drastically over the course of the last 5 years, which creates a lot more opportunity for people that are coming from clinical practice. And let me say one more thing before I forget, because I wanted to mention this. We covered this on the podcast a number of different times. So if anyone's interested, any clinicians that are listening, if you're interested, we have episode 51, from clinical to medical device MSL and beyond, with Maria Abunto. And then there was, career transition from clinician to medical science liaison, episode 18, Monica Sukatme. There is Why Clinicians Make Great MSL, Dawn O'Reilly. That's a very popular episode. That's number 88. And then there is The Path from Clinical Practice to Field Medical, which is pretty much what we're talking about today. And that's episode 48, and that's Jess Johnson and Whitney Tice. So if you guys haven't checked those out, I would recommend doing so. Not trying to be biased, just saying good content in there.
It is. And it's we all love hearing these stories because everyone has different tidbits and different pearls to share. So it's always great to hear everyone's story. So take notes of those episodes, go back and listen to them. I just want to make one quick comment, Josh, before I forget as well. When I was in pharmacy school, which I will date myself, I graduated in 2008. Industry wasn't talked about as a pathway. It's just patient care. Managed care was a big thing back then, was like the new thing. Yeah. And so I think pharmacy schools, there's a couple that are now starting to have like industry pathways, and I'm just blown away. They're like light years ahead of where I was. I was like, you know so much as a third year pharmacy student. I'm just amazed. And so I do think there is some pharmacy schools that are highlighting it now, and there's a bigger I think school of thought for it. So I do think pharmacists in general, when you look at the US landscape, there's more exposure to it. There's a lot more fellowships set up now and everything. So there is a bigger pathway for that. But back in back in my day, they did not have that, and it was kind of seen as the dark side. You're going to the dark side. Well, the dark side is a little bit bright and sunny, so I don't know. It's not that dark. But I'd love to hear a little bit. We've talked a little about our medical backgrounds and expertise. How would you highlight, or what would your recommendation be to highlight some of your strengths, your transferable experiences? Navhan, I'd love to hear a little bit, like, given that you have a clinician and physician background, what do you think are some of the strengths and some of the unique things that you bring as a physician to the team?
Yeah, so I'll go back to an earlier point. Anyone who's heard me talk to like the MSL Society, or anyone I've kind of coached privately, I often make this analogy, like you have to explain things to people like they're toddlers, right? So I think look, again, it's not a question of intelligence; it's just a question of terminology and connecting the dots. So when you're basically speaking with a hiring manager, or you're speaking with a future director. Or even a recruiter, I think you really have to kind of just like illustrate, kind of everything that's on your CV, right? So like when I review CVs, just as an example, something that I see often is something like gave a group presentation about polio to a bunch of doctors, right? And it's not really very illustrative, right? So you really want to expand on that, because you can't expect the recruiter, the hiring manager, to understand like how that's a transferable skill to the industry. I mean, like everyone here is like thinking like, obviously that makes sense, but you really have to illustrate it for them. So I want to make sure I say something like, gave a 45-minute scientific presentation to a group of 100 epidemiologists and clinicians at Stanford University that resulted in and you go on and you elaborate and elucidate that point, and then the transferable skill is like, well, if I could do this for an external audience and have an effect, then logically I could do this for the company and our portfolio and our product, and it can have an effect on KOLs, right? So that would be my best advice, really. It's just paint a picture, really kind of like boost yourself up a little bit, and show what you can do, right? You can't expect people to always connect the dots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And that's actually something I give as advice all the time to prospective MSLs, is that, maybe the first person you're talking to about a job is not the hiring manager or not another clinician. So they don't always know what you do day to day. So like as an internal medicine PA, I'm not just going to put hospitalist PA on my CV or my LinkedIn page. You really have to look at what those transferable skills are and be able to explain that. Pull up the MSL job descriptions. What are some of those key terms you use? So explain really how you can use those skills in an MSL role. Like, for example, cross-functional collaboration. You're working as a clinician with big teams of, PharmDs, MDs, PAs, NPs, nurses, MAs, whoever. So I think that that's a really important point, because so many people will just put, I was a cardiology PA or NP or MD, but they really don't go into explaining, here's why I would be a good fit based on those skills.
Yeah, I think a lot of times as we're, in the hospital every day working, seeing patients, you kind of forget that those are really amazing skills to have in the pharmaceutical world. And I think, like you guys are saying, thinking about ways to sort of really make those come to life on paper or a CV is really important. What I wanted to add, in my experience, I think it's so important to have a mix of sort of cerebral and sociable aspects in this job. I think and I think to me, this is one of the superpowers that maybe, clinicians have or bring, because I think some of it is genetic with people. They're just, you love to talk to people. But I think I've seen people come in with like computers open, just wanting to talk about data. But really, like me being an NP, I kind of understand how cardiologists think and work. And sometimes they just want to know how to like manage the patient with the indication and how, what kind of services and support they're going to need in the office. So I think, again, it's really important to understand how to read a room, to identify what the needs are, like I said, of the clinic or the hospital or whatever, but also having that education to be able to talk about those trials, dig deep into those trials and subgroups and what it is, but also just be able to say, oh, I saw that you went to UVA and I went there too. And what year did you grad? You have to be able to have a mix of both to really be successful, I feel. I don't know if that's just me, but.
No, I agree. I think it's funny. I think there's a lot of benefit from being able to do the shop talk, knowing the terminology, coming from a clinician background and training. You can do the shop talk. And I know it sounds odd, but being able to do the small little things, or just even talking about the latest, like breaking, information coming out, not even specifically for your product or TA. It could be something just distantly related. And it's like, isn't that amazing that this came out? And they're like, yeah. So they get excited, you get excited, and they connect with you because they understand that you're passionate about science and patient care. So I completely agree with you. I do agree that those of us that are maybe more sociable and chattier probably get drawn to the MSL role. And you don't have to be. You can totally introvert and still be fine. But I do get the comments like, you're one of the most outgoing pharmacists I've ever met. And I'm like, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So I do think that definitely helps. And it helps to break the ice because sometimes you come in and I know some of the cardiologists, you need to come fast and hard through the data before you ask them about their week and day. They just like, tell me, Josh, you guys are laughing at me. You know what I'm talking about. They're like, okay, break it down for me. And until you can do that 10-minute high level spiel for them, then they're like, okay, who are you again? What's your name? Oh yeah. Okay. Now it's nice to meet you. Now that I know that you can give me the data in a way that I need to hear it, that's going to be helpful to my patients. But everyone's laughing at me now, but it's true, right? We have some providers that are just like that. They're really cerebral first.
Right.
And then the niceties after. So I think these are all really great tips. What do you think some of the challenges are being a healthcare professional starting an MSL role? What do you think some of that we may be facing as we come in?
I can easily answer that one, being type A. I loved my career in the hospital, where I would go in, I would have my patients, I would be able to checklist everything off, assessments done, orders are in, labs are drawn, all those things, go about my day. The MSL role, as amazing it can be a little nebulous, I think, sometimes, and that's not a bad thing, but it's just, for me, the transition of going from checklist hospital to setting your own schedule, getting meetings on those types of things was a little challenging for me at first, because I didn't feel like I necessarily, at 9 p.m. when I left the hospital, I felt accomplished. I checked all these boxes. And I didn't feel like that every day when I was a new MSL, because I felt like I didn't check enough boxes to be successful. But then you start to realize, as you get into the role, how your successes come and outcomes come and things like that. So that was a challenge for me, coming from the hospital into the MSL role.
Yeah, I'll say that for me, one of the challenges was you just have to kind of get used to the notion that you're not on top of the food chain anymore. So in hospitals, not to be condescending to anyone, but there's a very rigid hierarchy, right? And essentially, just speaking about medicine or physicians, like you have the medical students, you have like the intern, you have the second year, third year, fourth year resident, you have the chief resident, and then you have the attending, right? And essentially the attending at the end of the day has final say over patient care, right? And when you get into industry, you often find, I'm sure everyone's experienced this, but sometimes you have to yield to marketing or sales priorities, because at the end of the day, you're working for a commercial company and they have to sell product. And that can be a bit jarring. So I think you need to go into it kind of with an expectation that there is going to be kind of like some negotiating. There's going to be some back and forth. You have to be diplomatic about everything. Sometimes you actually have to pick your battles. And things don't go your way. I think just have to pick yourself up and move on, right? Life goes on for both you and the company, and that's just the way that things work in industry, right? So yeah, so I think definitely you can be persuasive with people, and you can try and make your point and things like that. But there are budgetary constraints, there's manpower constraints. Again, there's just priorities that are set by management, and that's just the way it has to be in industry.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with both of you. I felt all of that when it came to industry. And just to build on Julie's point earlier, just the fact that it's a completely new career. And I talk to so many people who have transitioned into industry, and I think you forget that every career has its pros and cons, and people tend to focus on, I'm getting out of clinical practice, I'm not going to be as burned out, I'm going to have a more flexible schedule, maybe you're going to make more money. And then you all of a sudden start day one and it's like, what am I doing? I don't know how to be an MSL. Like, I just went to school all these years to become a clinician. I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I think it's really important for clinicians to also remember it is a completely new career. It's going to take you some time. I mean, at least 6 months to start to feel comfortable, probably a year to feel fully comfortable.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you guys all made good points. I'm going to counter a little bit. I think, yes, when you go into pharma, you're no longer top of the food chain, right? Because you are contending with marketing, commercial, and there's, obviously some companies are very, very strong in their departments. I think this is where we as a profession need to stand our ground and advocate, right? We've been in the clinic, we've been in the hospital, and we have to say, well, I understand why you're doing this, but this is what the patients are going to need. This is what the clinicians are going to hear. So I think that's something that we maybe shy away from in the beginning, because we're like, okay, I'm just trying to learn industry. I'm just trying to understand the new hierarchy in the pharmaceutical industry, and I'm down here. I'm an MSL. I'm a new peon, and so I understand that. And I think once you get over that fear, that first year, you have to realize you do bring a lot of experience from your background, and that you have to share that, and you have to speak, and you have to advocate. So I feel like as a profession, we need to stand strong to the science, to the clinician part, to the patient care part, and we need to advocate. And it may not happen this time, but if you keep bringing it up, it's going to change it for that next clinical trial, or for that next time that they're going to run that marketing, whatever it is. But we have to have that voice and that seat at the table, and I think it's incredibly valuable. So I'm going to counter and say, that's when we should keep speaking up. So, that's when they need to hear what we have to bring to the table. But I think for sure in the beginning, it's like, I'm so happy to be here. I'm not going to say anything, and I'm just going to listen because I don't know all the acronyms you just used. And I think that's really common in the beginning of industry. I'm still in that phase. I'm like, there's just a plethora of acronyms I went through it, and I don't know. I'm just taking notes now, and I'll have to figure this out over the next 2 weeks. So I think there's a lot of learning when you come into industry, but
Yeah.
Again, I think we bring so much experience from our practice and from our training. We have to bring that to the table, and we have to keep speaking up, because eventually we'll get heard at some point. So that's going to be my pitch on it. That's all I wanted to say. I'll get off my soapbox. I did want to just mention, I do think there seems to be a lot of PharmDs and PhDs that make up MSL roles. And, I think that's kind of the traditional sense. We are seeing a shift now of now more industry companies and companies considering more NPs and PAs when they didn't used to, right? So why do you think it's important to have variety on the team? Why I do see that there are some companies that are very conscious, like, I need to get variety now, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. You go first.
Oh, I was just going to say, I've seen this happen firsthand. I think that the biggest argument or the strongest argument for having variety on team is really just to prevent groupthink, right? I've seen this happen in person in real time, and it's really, really at the same time, it's really fascinating. You're like, oh, this is how big companies make very big blunders. But at the same time, it's kind of scary because it's just like a snowball. It just keeps going and going and going. So for those of you who don't know, groupthink is basically when people have similar backgrounds and similar training, it's we all get together in a room and basically come to the same conclusion because they have the same exact background. And it may not be what the company needs, and even worse, it could be not detrimental to the patient or to the doctors we're trying to help. So yeah, I think when you have people from a variety of backgrounds, it helps to mitigate some of that. And then I think along the same lines, it's like when companies have problems, you kind of get that clinical perspective to help them fix those problems. So I remember once one of the companies I was working with, the question of the ethics of marketing to medical students and residents came up, right? And basically, obviously, if you have physician MSLs, and obviously they went to medical school, they've been they were medical students. Well, they can give you something factual. You don't have to speculate, and you can save yourself a lot of embarrassment or even a lot of regulatory scrutiny. So yeah, I think it's fantastic, really, just to have that variety.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, completely agree with that. I think it's really important to just have that diverse team because it's made up of so many different people and backgrounds and perspectives. All of our training is very different. So, when I got into my current role, when I was talking to the hiring manager, I remember one of the things she said during our initial conversation was, I don't have a PA on my team right now. I have a PhD in PharmDs, but I don't have a PA. So it was like, well, let me tell you why you should have a PA on your team. And then when I actually got into the role, now I pull in MSLs from my team for different conversations. Like if I'm having a big group conversation, I may bring in somebody that has a PharmD background or somebody that has an NP or MD background, just so that group we're talking to, we can offer different unique perspectives.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I agree. I think sort of, never being at the top of the food chain, because as an NP, I never felt like I was at the top, especially working somewhere like Columbia, where it was like just nuts and crazy anyways. But I understood my value. And, a lot of times, the APPs were the ones who drove the decision-making and the management a lot of times. And I know I still have a lot of really good buddies from Columbia who are the cardiologists that I worked with, who I've known since fellowship. They've been attendings for years. You just, you realize the value of working well together. And I mean, my PharmD colleagues are so cerebral and smart, and I learn so much from you guys every day, because sometimes at work, we were just like, how do we use it? When do we use it? We don't really care about the study right now. We'll read it later. So I think, being able to understand the value of what everyone brings and just have different kind of ways that people look at things, like even in a journal club, the difference between a PharmD and an NP and an MD all in a journal club, we're all thinking different things and from the data. But at the end of that journal club, if it were all like MDs or PharmDs or NPs, we may not have gone so deep into the data, but you get a full picture. And I think that's what industry is realizing about what each of us brings. I know, just as an aside, I was pulled to like a marketing panel one time because the marketing done was like didn't make any sense to the patients that were going to see it. And they were like, well, you've been an NP and an RN educating these patients in booklets and things like that. So, we'd like to know what your thoughts are on it. So even things like that help the company as a whole are so important. And I think pharmaceutical companies are realizing that kind of value. We're all talented in our own ways, and coming together just makes everything much stronger than having one type of person.
I agree. I just agree with everything everyone said. It's true. The variety on the team makes the team stronger. You bring your different experiences, and that's really valuable. And you don't want to have the group talk. He's totally correct. You have everyone talk like pharmacists on the team. You totally miss stuff. You have all PhDs on the team. Super cerebral. You're gonna miss all. You're gonna get all the scientific down. You're gonna miss a lot of like hospital system stuff. It's so interesting. You have to have that variety. I learn the most from my other colleagues. I mean, I've been so lucky. I've had mentors that are PhDs, and they've just taught me so much, especially like when it comes to statistics. Like, you need to say it this way. You're going to get slaughtered if you just said it the way you said it. And I'm like, ooh, would never have known. So we're getting a little close on time. So I'm going to say, if you guys have any last minute questions, please put them into the chat box. We have quite a few comments to go through. And then just, for the panel, where do you see future roles, potential roles? Where would you like to see new roles for healthcare professionals? And then do you have any last words or advice or tips before we start going through all of our comments and questions I think we have?
I mean, I think just like I said, even with marketing, I think the great thing about me with pharma is I've learned so much more about sort of accounts and marketing and different types of things that I just didn't have the time to learn when I was in clinical practice. And, you know, the commercial team being like teaching me so much about insurance and learning about those types of things has been invaluable to me. So I think, Julie, what you said, I'm 100% in agreement. It's just like from day one, understanding your value. You were brought into the company for a reason. And as you're learning and, you know, navigating, don't forget where you came from and think about if you hear anything. I always tell people, keep your ears open all the time. If there's something in marketing that doesn't make sense or you see something, like don't be afraid to reach out to your director or someone and ask about it. So I'm hoping that more roles for clinicians will open up even outside of like the MSL role in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I think especially, like I said, I work for a big pharmaceutical company, and I think exactly, I want to see, you know, those roles expanded outside of just MSL. I mean, there's so many things within research and drug safety and sales training, whatever else it may be. There's so many different areas that you can go into, content creation. So I'd love to see more clinicians in those different roles too.
Just to lead on what Julie and Josh said, you know, speaking of, you know, like the shy, timid MSL, especially like in the first 6 months when you're onboarding, I will just say, like in my experience, like everyone is more than happy to talk about what they do and you know, the importance of their own role in their own department, right? So it's like when you ask the sales to explain something, or when you ask marketing to explain something, or, you know, ask why it's a priority or why we need to do it this way, they're only more than happy to talk about it, right? Like it doesn't come off as patronizing or as irritating or anything like that. I think sometimes they're even just like pleasantly surprised that another department is taking an interest in what they do, and I think that just makes you, you know, a better MSL. I'll also just say, like, never be afraid to raise your hand and volunteer for something, even outside of your comfort zone, right? You know, with my last role, you know, I mean, officially I was an MSL, but I was also doing like regulatory affairs and government affairs and market access and all of these kinds of things unofficially, just because, you know, we were a small startup. And, you know, I just learned so much about, you know, vaccines and the way their procurement and all of that stuff, the way that it works here in Canada. Yeah, it was just, you know, me saying like, I can do that, I can try that, I'll have a go at that. Yeah, people will support you and help you and teach you what they can. And your efforts always appreciated, right? Whether you kind of realize it or not. I think, you know, management does appreciate it when you kind of take ownership of your development and take ownership of your territory and try and drive these things forward. Like I just got nothing but, you know, positive feedback, even though I wasn't really quite sure I knew what I was doing and having all of these things. So you know, it all worked out in the end. Don't be afraid to branch out and to try new things.
I'm going to mention this, and I think this may touch on some people's comments. I think there are some companies that are starting to hire healthcare professionals into the commercial marketing side. I don't think that's been what's traditionally done. And I do think that the companies that do are starting to have an advantage because they have that scientific, medical, clinical side on their marketing and commercial side to help guide, correct some of the language. What's going to make sense to the patients? What is the most important thing to clinician to see on the front page? I think having more roles on that side is going to be interesting. That's not the typical role right now. That's not a typical path, but I do think there's a lot of benefit from having healthcare professionals on that side. I think it's going to help, you know, really strengthen your strategy and bring your company focus more aligned. I mean, we always talk about that, the alignment. So I'd love to see a company with a really strong, tight alignment, but I think, you know, most companies struggle a little and it's a little wavy sometimes, right? And you know, Navhan has alluded, it's, you know, sometimes medical has their thoughts and then, you know, another department has their thoughts and there's always a little bit of discussion, right? So I think having more of each type on each side is going to help. So that would be my only thought for the future. We're going to go into a couple of questions and comments because I think we have quite a few. There's some comments about clinicians need to be being able to be entrepreneurial, wearing the commercial marketing hat to become successful MSLs. I would say maybe that's more the business acumen you're sort of alluding to. I think that's something that we as clinicians do not understand as we're coming in, but there is a business landscape that you have to know. And I think coming from a bit healthcare system helps because you understand how hierarchy works in terms of like commercial plans and getting on formulary and how that affects everything. So I think having good business acumen for the layout of your line is incredibly helpful because then you realize, oh, there's a referral system in place, and these doctors talk to each other, they know each other. These doctors talk to only these people, and so just knowing that business landscape is incredibly important. Any thoughts on? So there's that, along with the comment of, would you recommend a marketing or MBA degree to become more marketable for an MSL position? What are your guys' thoughts on these kind of two comments since they're similar-ish?
I'll just say quickly, I've actually thought of an MBA myself since I've become an MSL. I have friends in industry who have them. Everyone has a different answer. But I would say to someone who's new, if you don't have it coming in, give yourself time to sort of learn the role and understand the organization, because a lot of times there may be money that they'll pay for you to go back. You may be able just to sort of learn and take courses through the company to pinpoint exactly what you need to learn business acumen wise. So that's what I've been told by friends with and without them. And I'm still sort of in the air of what I'm going to do. But I think don't rush to get one thinking it will help maybe get you the career, but kind of see what the company has to offer, which a lot of times is different working in the hospital where you have to do everything yourself. I love about industry is day one, they're like, we need to work on your development and where can you go and what can you do for the company? So give it some time and learn what the company can do for you, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm in exactly the same boat. I think you definitely don't need an MBA or a business background to get into industry. I mean, this is still primarily a scientific and kind of medical position, but I think it's something that might happen down the line. So just for me, industry in a couple of years, and again, just kind of applying myself in other departments, like, now I see the value in an MBA, and it's something that I'm also thinking about doing, and that might lend itself to other opportunities like in regulatory affairs or with government affairs and things like that. But I would say just at the beginning it's probably not necessary.
Yeah, that's what I would say too. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I mean, I think it sets you apart and it's getting more and more competitive. So maybe if you're having trouble, it can be that one thing that sets you apart. But really, people ask all the time, do I need this? Do I need this? But a lot of times it comes down to the company and the hiring manager.
Yeah. I would say if you weren't planning to get an MBA already, I wouldn't get one to get your MSL role. Like if that was going to be your path anyways, sure. But yeah, I agree with others. I think if you're thinking about it down the road and you become an MSL first, it'd be probably beneficial the other way around. Become an MSL, get a couple of years under your belt, and then get your MBA. So another question we got a lot of great comments, and thank you so much for all the comments, everyone. There was a question on what are common pitfalls when transitioning from clinical practice to industry. I think we mentioned a couple of those. Is there any other ones that you guys wanted to mention or highlight before we move on?
I mean, I think one thing maybe people just don't realize moving from clinician to industry is that industry just has its own set of rules. That's one thing people don't understand. When I joined the pharmaceutical area, I was all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, there's so many rules around everything you do. And there's certain things you can feel like they're very strict. So, from my perspective, I think that was something that I learned very quickly and I wasn't expecting as a clinician.
Agreed.
Yeah, I would just say like, I think you need to look at yourself as a package and make sure that you come off as like industry friendly as possible, right? So it's funny, like when I review CVs for people, like I don't even need to know their background, just the way that the CV is formatted, I can tell exactly where they're coming from. Because like an academic CV, it's like a telephone book. It's like sizing font, there's no spacing. It's very hard on the eyes. Doctors, like it's a little too simplistic. They're like hosted M&M. I'm just like, yeah, I know what that means, but no one else knows what that means. So so like I think you need to make sure like your CV is like industry friendly. You need to make sure your cover letter is industry friendly. Like there are ways of doing this, right? You can take a course like through the MSL Society, or you can speak with people who have already made the jump and ask for their feedback. You can get a professional coach. I mean, there's lots of ways to kind of like identify and mitigate some potential issues. That when you're applying, the recruiter, the hiring manager can see you making that transition, right? So so that's kind of what I would say.
I think for me, one of the hardest things to transition was I was used to having an opinion. I'm a pharmacist. You call me and you're like, what's this dose? Should I be doing this? Well, yep, this is probably what's going to be best for your patient. You're now an MSL. You do not have an opinion. You're Switzerland. You cannot tell them if the data is good or bad. You just tell them the data. You can't say this is interesting. No, it's interesting to you in your head. You cannot tell the provider you think it's interesting. So I think that was one of my hardest things was not having an opinion when I was going through the scientific data, and learning to, like, if they asked a question, I had to be like, oh, I'm no longer a pharmacist. I can no longer answer your question. It is your clinical decision, doctor, nurse practitioner, pharmacist, PA that I'm talking to. So it was that was, I think, my hardest part was resisting giving a recommendation. So I think it's our instinct to say, oh yeah, the guidelines say this. Nope. Well, you can say the guidelines say this. You can't say what your recommendation is. Mm-hmm. So that was, I think, the hardest part.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to mention really quick, Josh may have to jump on in about a few minutes. So in case we're mid-conversation, you can sign off when you're into, but we appreciate that you're on. You don't have to sign off until you need to go, but I just want to mention in case we're mid-conversation, because we have a couple more questions. So we're going to try to wrap them up real quick. There was a question of, when you got your first MSL role in territory, were you already located in and had established relationships? Was that something that the hiring managers expected when hiring clinical practitioners without industry experience? I'm going to say it's not expected. It's a nice to have. I think they expect you to have your clinical and scientific background if you're coming from a clinician role with no industry experience. Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think with most companies, you're going to probably inherit a territory and a KOL list from someone, and it's kind of up to you to kind of massage that. You might expand it, contract it. You might hit it off with some KOLs and not others, and it's sort of a dynamic thing. With my second MSL position, I had a clean slate. So I had literally nothing, and I came up with everything from scratch. And in the end, I got handed off to someone. So yeah, I think to your point, Julie, you're exactly right. It's like just make sure your clinical acumen and your scientific acumen is kind of up to speed, and the relationships and the territory and all of that will come with time.
I mean, just real quick, I think it depends on the hiring manager completely. I've talked to hiring managers that really specifically want someone in a territory, and I've talked to those that are like, I don't care as long as they have the right background and the right skills. But remember, if you're interviewing, also, like, you have to kind of be proactive and remind people sometimes and say, hey, talent trumps location. You can be the one that actually reminds them of that. If you're talking to a hiring manager that's like, hey, you have to live in X city, sometimes you have to be the one to mention that to them.
Okay, we're going to wrap up on our last few questions here really super quick, and then if we don't get to it, we'll try to respond to it on LinkedIn. Okay, guys, so we went over today. We have an awesome panel, of course, amazingly, but do you need a PGY 1 or 2 after PharmD to get an MSL position? No, but I think clinical practice helps, or going into fellowship. That's all I'm going to say for that one, and you can message me if you have more questions. Are there particular companies that are more friendly to new clinical backgrounds, MSLs, that you are aware of? I think Tom has a plethora of episodes that kind of touch upon what you need for your background when you're trying to transition. So I'm going to turn it back to go to one of his episodes. Are there any benefits to any type of MSL certification? It's helpful, but again, not necessary. It's a nice to have, I think. Okay, we're going to wrap it at this point because I think we're really at the top of the hour. We will go back. If you guys, if the panel has time to come back and answer some of the questions, we would appreciate it. And we thank you all so much for joining us today. This is a really great discussion. We probably could have gone another hour easily. Thank you so much all for joining us. Thank you to our amazing panelists. Tom, any last words?
Thanks, guys. This was awesome, and I hope you all enjoyed it. We're going to put this up. It'll be on LinkedIn, but I'm also going to put it on our YouTube channel. So check it out, share it with your friends, and thanks for joining us. We had a really big group today. We had a great panel. We had a big group. So thank you, Julie.
And I did just want to say, I saw in the chat, anybody can reach out to me who was here, if that's okay. I mean, I saw if it was okay, totally fine. I unfortunately have to jump off to another call, but I'm happy to entertain any emails or anything like that from LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to me.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you guys so much. It was so much fun.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks, Julie,
Bye.
Kirsten, and Nabhan. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank you.